The Kevin Durant trade has finally happened. He is headed to the Houston Rockets in exchange for Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, the 10th overall pick in the draft, and a handful of second-round picks. And this is a trade construction that had been rumored for a while. As we were getting reports about San Antonio, Miami, Minnesota, Toronto changing around their offers or potentially, what was on the table for them, this Houston deal was always something that was there for Phoenix. Jalen Green, the 10th pick in the draft, and some contracts. And ultimately, Houston didn't have to add anything else to that package, and that was what the Suns were waiting for. This is why it's taken so long, is the Suns were waiting for some team to increase their offer, some team to figure out some other piece that would take them over the finish line, and ultimately, they just decided that this Houston trade package was the best one out there. Houston is on Kevin Durant's list of teams that he would like to go to. He has a previous relationship with Ime Udoka, who was on staff when Durant was in Brooklyn, and of course, Durant's fit with this Houston roster works really, really well with their needs. And I want to start with the Rockets side of this first, and then we'll get to Phoenix. Coming into the offseason, everybody knew that Houston was going to be going after some kind of star. It was clear that their roster was ready for the next step after getting the second seed in the West, but then struggling at times in the postseason, especially offensively. And it was clear that they needed that focal point offensive guy at the center of their team. And so we're looking at Giannis. We're looking at, of course, Kevin Durant. And KD is ultimately the guy that they land. And the important part of this for Houston, and the really interesting part to me, is that they didn't give up any of the future Phoenix picks. One of the reasons that Houston was so heavily connected to Durant, other than the Udoka connection and the obvious need on the roster, was that they own the future first-round picks that Phoenix would want in exchange for KD, that they got via the Brooklyn Nets from a previous offseason trade. And the assumption was that if KD ended up in Houston, more than likely it would be as a result of the Suns wanting to get their own future first-round picks back. That didn't happen. In this deal for Phoenix, we're going to talk about it from their side later, but it's not like this deal all of a sudden makes them much better. And so Houston not only gets KD, but they've also made, at least in an immediate sense, the Suns pretty much worse. So then that increases the value of their picks. It is an unbelievable win for the Rockets that they were able to make this deal happen and keep those future Phoenix picks. Losing Dillon Brooks is going to hurt them in some ways, but they've got plenty of guys in the rotation like Reed Shepard, Cam Whitmore, that they're ready to step up. Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, all these guys will be able to play much, much more without Dillon Brooks there. And Jalen Green, although it's definitely a loss and a young player that you would have liked to see develop, if Jalen Green had developed into the guy that they wanted him to be and needed him to be when they drafted him, this deal wouldn't have happened in the first place. He hasn't gotten to where they need him to be, and they're accelerating their timeline by trading for Kevin Durant. There's obvious concerns here in terms of the impending contract extension, and because KD is on the list and wanted to go to Houston, I would assume that it's going to be pretty easy. They're going to sign him to the 2-year, $112 million extension, and he's going to play his next couple of seasons with Houston. You're concerned about injury stuff. You're concerned about age, but for me, if I'm the Rockets, this is always a trade that I make happen. You draw this line in the sand at Jalen Green, the 10th pick, and some contracts, and you let the Suns come back to you and say, okay, this is a deal that we'll take. And that's exactly what happened. The other side of this now for Phoenix, this is a more complex deal than it appears at first. You get the 10th overall pick in this draft. They're going to be able to get a nice player for that, and a young player that they desperately need to be good. They have got to nail that pick because, like I said, they owe some of their future first-round picks. It's going to be the best draft asset they're going to have for a while, and so it's an incredibly important selection for them now, and one of the reasons why it maybe seemed like Houston was the team that was going to end up with KD over the last week or so is because they've been doing a lot of work on guys right around this range in the draft, and so obviously now they have that 10th overall pick. The Jalen Green part of this is going to get pretty interesting because one of the reasons I think this also took a little bit longer than people expected is because they weren't really all that interested in Jalen Green, and more so were trying to find a third team to send him to, and that hasn't been reported as part of this trade. So Jalen Green's going to be a Houston Rocket, but the understanding is that they are definitely going to explore the trade market to some of these teams around the league that might want a young guard like Jalen Green, because obviously doesn't play super well alongside Devin Booker, doesn't really fit their timeline as a 23-year-old, and this is a franchise that wants to keep Devin Booker happy over the next couple of seasons so that he doesn't request a trade. And so ultimately, I would be surprised if Jalen Green was on the Rockets roster when the season starts, but even if he was, I still think it's a pretty good piece to have depending on how he performs in a new situation. There's a possibility here where that contract looks really, really tough over the next couple of years, but ultimately I think it's a positive asset and they're going to be able to either get something out of him or he's going to be a nice piece for Phoenix. The Dillon Brooks part of this is interesting as well. It's going to help them in an immediate sense alongside Devin Booker. Also a guy that if things go really poorly and Booker asks out or something, Dillon Brooks is going to be worth something to some of these teams around the league that need that that competitiveness and that 3-and-D role player type guy. And so ultimately, it's not terrible compensation in exchange for 36, 37-year-old Kevin Durant with some injury issues over the last couple of seasons and an expiring contract. Ultimately, this is the position that Phoenix put themselves in when they went all in with this group and it didn't work out. And then they tried to trade KD at the trade deadline, and then that didn't work. They just put themselves in a position where they didn't have basically any leverage in these trade conversations. Durant could dictate where he wanted to go, and ultimately, that's why teams like Houston didn't feel the need to raise their offer in any kind of meaningful way. And that's how he ends up in Houston. So now we keep an eye on what happens with Jalen Green, what happens with Kevin Durant's extension, and then obviously what the Rockets are going to look like going into next season. If you're going to grade this deal, for me personally, for the Rockets, it's an A+. The fact that you get Kevin Durant, who is a perfect fit on this roster. They have every other piece. They have these exciting guys in the front court, Amen Thompson and Alperen Şengün, great defensive player in Thompson, great offensive player in Şengün. You've got a backcourt guy in Fred VanVleet that's going to be able to set up KD. You've got shooting and spacing in Reed Shepherd. You've got all these other picks as well that you're able to continue to use to improve the roster, and you still keep those Phoenix picks. That to me is the craziest part of all this. I just would have assumed that the Suns would not trade with Houston unless they were getting one of their picks back, and ultimately that's probably the biggest part of the deal, apart from, literally adding Kevin Durant to a team that was the 2 seed in a very tough Western Conference last year. It's an A+ for the Rockets. For Phoenix, I'm going to give them like a C+ grade. I can understand the value of the 10th pick and Jalen Green. Like I said, even someone like Dillon Brooks, I'm sure is going to have value, but it's more so how they handled the trade situation as a whole, not understanding where they were at, obviously comparing this to what they traded away in exchange for KD a handful of years ago, and really just misplaying the Kevin Durant situation for basically the entirety of his career in Phoenix, and really misplaying it over the last year or so. Just strictly from a trade compensation standpoint, this is not enough in exchange for Kevin Durant, but this is a situation that they kind of forced themselves into. They backed themselves into a corner, and this is a deal that they just kind of accepted that they had to take rather than a deal that they were really excited about. Now, they could get a really great player with the 10th overall pick. Dillon Brooks could be really good for them. They could get something really cool in exchange for Jalen Green, and maybe this is the trade that really turns things around. But as of right now, it's a pretty messy roster in Phoenix next year if they keep Brooks and Green to add to Beal and Booker. That's a lot of like 2-3 guards kind of just running around out there, not doing a whole lot. They've got a new head coach. There's a lot of things still to figure out in Phoenix. And so I would give them pretty much a C+ grade here. But the bottom line is we finally know where Kevin Durant's going to be next year. He's going to be a Houston Rocket, and I cannot wait to see what that team looks like with all these crazy athletic wings and defensive guys. They've got all the shooting. They've got like a really strong 9 or 10 man rotation. It opens up the possibility of more Reed Shepherd minutes next year. This is going to be a really, really fun team in Houston next year. They've got the coach, they've got their star player, and importantly, if down the road they want to revisit the Giannis thing or someone else becomes available, they have more assets to continue to make moves. This was always the appeal, whether it be for Houston or San Antonio. This was always the appeal of a Kevin Durant trade, is he's really, really good, but his value is pretty low, so you can trade for him and have stuff left over, and that's exactly the position that the Rockets have put themselves in by trading for Kevin Durant.